It's been a long wait, a long process, plenty of smoke screens, plenty of outright lies, but the NFL draft is finally here this week. The first round commencing on Thursday, the 28th, followed by rounds 2 and 3 on Friday, and rounds 4 through 7 coming up on Saturday. And with the NFL draft for 2022 finally here in our midst, that means it is time for my final, and this year first, mock draft for 2022. All 32 first round picks. Plus, we're going to throw in all 32 second-round picks this season as well. Now, we're going to give you a short breakdown for each of the picks in the first round, and then we'll give you just a little bit of information dotted here and there for the 32 picks in the second round as well. Feel free to subscribe to make sure that you are continuing to see all the videos we produce. You can follow myself and all of my live draft takes on Twitter at Brendan DZW, and for Chiefs-specific draft talk, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at 580 Sports Talk. We have plenty to get to in this video mock draft today, so without further ado, with the first overall pick of our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars select
Aidan Hutchinson, edge rusher, Michigan. It's been a few years since this has been the case, but the number one overall pick is a tough one this year. It has seemed for months like Aidan Hutchinson out of Michigan is the obvious pick, but now there's been so much smoke and so many changes to the betting market surrounding Travon Walker of Georgia, it feels like that might be where this pick for Jacksonville goes. We're going to go with the safe option, though. There are some concerns about Hutchinson, specifically with what his ceiling is, and some major concerns about his arm length as well and his size, but he's a solid player, a steady player who should pair up well next to Josh Allen in the future for Jacksonville.
With the number 2 overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Detroit Lions select
Travon Walker, edge rusher, Georgia. Well, if Aidan Hutchinson is off the board already, then we're going to have Detroit taking Travon Walker from Georgia, although, again, as I mentioned earlier, it feels with all these rumors over the last couple of days, those picks may end up being flipped. Walker has tremendous upside, and it's a piece that makes a lot of sense for the Lions. The concern comes from a very small amount of collegiate production, especially when compared to Hutchinson, but if you want to go with the traits and you want to take someone with high upside in a deep edge class, Detroit would make Walker a smart pick.
With the 3rd overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Houston Texans select
Derek Stingley Jr., cornerback, LSU. This pick may come as a surprise to some, but for one, there has again been plenty of smoke and plenty of rumors about this pick over the last couple of days, but also it shouldn't surprise anyone who knows anything about Stingley's body of work. He is a tremendously, stupendously talented cornerback. He's sticky, he's got the speed, he's got the fluid hips, he's got everything you want out of a top-tier cornerback and a day one starting cornerback. Had some injury concerns at LSU, but in terms of the talent, Houston can't go wrong with Derek Stingley.
With the 4th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the New York Jets select
Jermaine Johnson, edge rusher, Florida State. Johnson's projections during the draft process have put him anywhere from here in the top 5 picks of the draft all the way to maybe the end of the draft, maybe the late 20s, even into the early 30s. I like Johnson a lot, and even in a year with plenty of edge rushers available, it's probably the deepest position in this year's draft, at least during the first couple of days of the draft. He has tons of talent, loved his tape from Florida State, and I think he makes a lot of sense for a Jets team that needs some edge rusher help and that also has a defensive-minded head coach in Robert Saleh.
With the 5th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the New York G-Men football Giants select
EKWONU, offensive tackle, North Carolina State. The 5th overall pick for the Giants is both a no-brainer while at the same time being a little bit of a coin flip. It's a no-brainer because they need to keep working on that offensive line. It's gotten a little bit better over time, but you look at the so far bust in Andrew Thomas, you look at the other struggles they've had, they need some offensive tackle help. The coin toss part comes in with whether you want to go with EKWONU like we do here or Evan Neal from Alabama. We decided to use injury history and injury concerns as the tiebreaker. Icky's got fewer of those than Neal, so EKWONU is the pick for the Giants.
With the 6th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Carolina Panthers select
Malik Willis, quarterback, Liberty. Here's where things get a little more bold and a little more wacky than the first 5 picks of the draft. Now, it's a weak year for quarterbacks overall, but Malik Willis is certainly the most intriguing prospect of the crop this year. There's a lot of room for seasoning. Most experts think he'll need some time to prepare and get acclimated to the NFL, but he's got great arm strength. He's got plenty of smarts. He's got all the physical gifts you could want. There's a lot of talk that Carolina is not enamored with taking a quarterback this year, but you can bet if Matt Rule gets any sort of say, he'll want a rookie quarterback that he can use to buy a little more time for him in Carolina.
With the 7th overall pick in the 2022 NFL mock draft, the New York Giants select
KAYVON THIBODEAUX, edge rusher, Oregon. This is my favorite pick of the top 10, and that's because I think KAYVON THIBODEAUX might be the best player so far taken in this top 10. I know there has been talk about his desire, his passion, his love of football, his effort, all of that. I think KAYVON THIBODEAUX is a better edge rusher than AIDAN Hutchinson. I think he's a better edge rusher than Travon Walker. He's got the accolades. He has the recruiting pedigree as well. And if the Giants are able to make sure that he is at least staying focused on the game, I think he's going to be the best edge taken in this year's class.
With the 8th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Atlanta Falcons select
Evan Neal, offensive tackle, Alabama. This might not be the biggest need-based pick in the first round, but it is one of the best fits and one of the most exciting ones, I think, for an Atlanta team that frankly is not going to be very good this year. Neal is huge. He had plenty of success at Alabama, and that's a Falcons offensive line that could certainly use some upgrading. This is not going to be a good Falcons team in all likelihood coming up in 2022 with Marcus Mariota leading the offense, so you might as well build for the future and get a future starting tackle who can lock down that offensive line going forward.
With the 9th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Seattle Seahawks select
Ahmad Sauce Gardner, cornerback, Cincinnati. Nobody in the world would be surprised if the Seattle Seahawks trade out of the 9th overall pick. That's just what John Schneider, Pete Carroll, and company do. But if the Seahawks do stay there at number 9, I like them to sort of rebuild that secondary and add in one of the most talented defensive backs in the class in Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati. A lot of people have him as the number 1 corner in this class. For me, he is just slightly behind Derek Stingley. I like both of them, and the 6'2 Gardner I think is a really nice fit for that Seattle secondary.
With the 10th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the New York Jets select
Drake London, wide receiver, USC. Our first wide receiver from a deep wide receiver class goes off the board. It's the football and basketball player from USC. That's Drake London. He is headed to New York. Now, some people on the downside think that London may end up being just another big body who can only win because he won a bunch of jump balls in college, a la a N'Keal Harry. The other comparison on the bright side, though, compares him to Mike Evans. I think he is a better separator than some of those jump ball only guys. I think he's got great run after the catch ability, good speed, great hands as well. I think that's a great fit for Zach Wilson and the Jets.
With the 11th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Washington Commanders select
Kyle Hamilton, safety, Notre Dame. Kyle Hamilton may be the biggest victim of draft fatigue for anyone in this year's class because he's been considered a great prospect for so long that things like his 40 time at the combine are being nitpicked, or various other little things have led to him not being discussed too much. Don't overthink it with Kyle Hamilton. He would be a great fit on the back end of a Washington secondary that took a huge step back in 2021. He's rangy, he's got great ball skills, and he's as smart as they come, and he is going to be a long-time anchor for that Washington secondary.
With the 12th overall pick in the 2022 NFL mock draft, the Minnesota Vikings select
Jordan Davis, interior defensive lineman, Georgia. Jordan Davis is more than just a big body. He is a true game wrecker, and he showed that consistently while he was playing for the national champion Georgia Bulldogs. He can get after the quarterback. He can beat blockers, really anything you want, and that is exactly why he's the first interior defensive lineman off the board. And we should also remark about the fact that he is truly huge. And for Minnesota, it's a pick that makes a lot of sense. Their starting front three of Harrison Phillips, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Jalen Twyman could definitely use some upgrading.
With the 13th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Houston Texans select
Garrett Wilson, wide receiver, Ohio State. This seems like a natural fit, especially when you consider that Houston's got a quarterback who is limited but had a good rookie year in Davis Mills, and the fact that the wide receiver room for Houston is pretty sparse with Brandon Cooks, the second-year player Nico Collins, and then Chris Conley as your top three. Garrett Wilson's a very well-rounded all-around receiver. He's a good route runner. He's got good hands, good speed. He's your typical jack of all trades. There's nothing that he is necessarily great at, but he's got so many plus skills that make him a tantalizing prospect.
With the 14th pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Baltimore Ravens select
Devonte Wyatt, interior defensive lineman, Georgia. The Baltimore Ravens historically have a really good defensive line because they always have the biggest, strongest, most talented dudes on that defensive line, along with great coaching as well, and that's where Devonte Wyatt comes into play. Now, Wyatt does come with some off-field concerns and some red flags, but Baltimore is a well-run organization with a good program in place that should be able to mitigate most of those concerns. And Wyatt can line up next to any of the guys Baltimore currently has on that defensive line and can contribute right away against a weak group of AFC North offensive lines.
With the 15th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select
Jameson Williams, wide receiver, Alabama. The Eagles and their woes trying to find a number one receiver in the first round of the draft, or at least early in the draft, are well documented, but they're going to take another bite at the apple here in our mock draft and go for Jameson Williams, who might be the most dynamic playmaker of anyone in this year's first round. The concern is how healthy and productive he can be year one, coming off of an ACL tear late in the college football season, but I think he is explosive enough, and it sounds like his rehab is going well enough that he should still make a big impact his rookie year.
With the 16th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the New Orleans Saints select
Charles Cross, offensive tackle, Mississippi State. This feels like a bit of a slide for Charles Cross, and if you were going to tell me that he could go anywhere in the top 10, maybe even in the top 15, I would tell you that that makes plenty of sense. But if the draft does unfold this way, it's a huge coup for New Orleans. They end up getting one of the best offensive tackles coming out of the always rough and tumble SEC, and they can start to rebuild an offensive line that is undeniably going to look a little bit different now that Teron Armstead has left the team after many years to take a huge free agent deal with the Miami Dolphins. Cross will fill in for him.
With the 17th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Los Angeles Chargers select
Zion Johnson, interior offensive lineman, Boston College. The number one thing on the field keeping the Chargers offense from reaching its full potential is a bad offensive line right now in front of quarterback Justin Herbert. So enter Zion Johnson, the interior offensive lineman from Boston College, who should add a nasty streak and some, frankly, just good blocking to a group that is desperately missing it. Now, you could argue for a tackle here as well, and the best option there would likely be Trevor Penning from Northern Iowa. They need someone to replace Storm Norton at right tackle, but for now, they'll work inside and they'll happily take Zion Johnson.
With the 18th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select
George Karlaftis, edge rusher, Purdue. Albert Breer of the Monday Morning Quarterback said this week that Karlaftis may be the guy who's getting the most surprising hype, who feels like a player that could slide out of the first round of this year's draft, but I do think it's still a good fit for this Eagles team. He is a prototypical 4-3 defensive end, so he'll fit in with the Eagles' defensive front, and the Eagles have to find some sort of future pass rush. Derek Barnett has only topped 6 sacks once in his career, and Brandon Graham's not getting any younger, so adding Karlaftis to add a little youth and a little boost to that defensive front.
With the 19th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the New Orleans Saints select
Chris Olave, wide receiver, Ohio State. If you wanted to tell me that you think Chris Olave might be the best wide receiver in this year's NFL draft class, I'd have a hard time arguing that with you because there are at least 4 guys you could make that argument for. That's how deep the wide receivers are this year. Olave does a tremendous job of just getting open. He finds ways to create separation. He's a great route runner, and he's got really nice hands as well. And he can help rebuild a wide receiver room that, outside of Michael Thomas, who's a question mark on his own, doesn't have a ton of talent to help out Jameis Winston. So Olave's a great fit here.
With the 20th overall pick in the 2022 NFL mock draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers select
Trevor Penning, offensive tackle, Northern Iowa. Admittedly, I don't love this pick because 1, Pittsburgh still desperately needs a future quarterback, and 2, I just don't love Penning as a prospect. I think he does need a lot of seasoning, and seeing him get bull rushed and destroyed by a much smaller Kyron Johnson at the Senior Bowl really didn't do a whole lot for me in terms of evaluating Penning. However, he is massive and he plays with a mean streak. This is a Pittsburgh team that, regardless of who is taking snaps this year and next, is going to need to find someone who can help anchor a new look offensive line.
With the 21st overall pick in the 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the New England Patriots select
Trent McDuffie, cornerback, Washington. This would be a bit of a tendency breaker for Bill Belichick and the Patriots, who haven't taken a defensive back in the first round of the NFL draft since back when they took Devin McCourty in 2010, although that pick obviously worked out. However, New England does need to find a way to replace J.C. Jackson, who left in free agency for a huge contract with the Los Angeles Chargers. McDuffie is an aggressive and willing tackler. His coverage skills are very good, if not quite to the level of a Sauce Gardner or a Derek Stingley, and he's a good fit for a New England defense that needs to get younger.
With the 22nd overall pick in the 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the 13-time world champion, 4-time Super Bowl champion, home of the 2-time reigning NFL MVP, Green Bay Packers select
Treylon Burks, wide receiver, Arkansas. It is a fool's errand trying to pick a wide receiver to the Green Bay Packers in the first round of the draft, considering it's just not something they believe in philosophically, and I would not be surprised at all. In fact, part of me is expecting them to not take a wide receiver until the second round or possibly after that. I'm not buying into the is Treylon Burks the next Deebo Samuel nonsense because there's only one Deebo, but Burks does have a very exciting mix of size, speed, and he had tremendous college production, and I think he makes a good fit for Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur in Green Bay.
With the 23rd overall pick in our 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the Arizona Cardinals select
BOYE MAFE, edge rusher, Minnesota. Understandably, this one might feel like a little bit of a stretch taking Mafe at 23, although I do like the fit for an edge rusher with Arizona. The concerns with Mafe pop up with his age because he's already 24 years old, and he didn't have a ton of production either in his final year or over the course of his career at Minnesota. But if you want an athlete off the edge, and Arizona might, to replace Chandler Jones, you might as well go with the guy who had one of the best relative athletic testing scores of anyone in this draft process.
With the 24th overall pick in our 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the Dallas Cowboys select
Tyler Linderbaum, center, Iowa. Linderbaum is the best center in this year's draft and is an absolute mauler coming out of a school that is known for producing maulers on the offensive line. At first blush, this feels like a strange fit, and understandably so, because the Cowboys do have other needs along their offensive line, and they do have a starting center already in Tyler BOYE. The reason why we're going with Linderbaum here is that he's likely already better than Tyler BOYE. You could try him somewhere else in the middle. If you've got a chance to upgrade that offensive line, I think the Cowboys have to take it.
With the 25th overall pick in our 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the Buffalo Bills select
KAIIR ELAM, cornerback, Florida. Elam is an interesting prospect to me because despite some accolades, despite what I believe to be good tape, no one seems to really be talking about him as a bona fide first-round pick. Now, his production from 2021 certainly does not jump off the page with just one interception, but he was first-team All-SEC back in 2020, and I think he's got the skills to be a very productive NFL player. For Buffalo on defense, their biggest need is a new cornerback, with Trey White returning from an injury and with losing Levi Wallace in free agency.
With the 26th overall pick in our 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the Tennessee Titans select
Kenny Pickett, quarterback, Pitt. This is the spiciest pick of this mock draft without a doubt, and while Pickett put up crazy numbers at Pittsburgh, he's far from a transformational prospect. He doesn't have anything that's truly elite in terms of his arm strength, his precision, anything like that. He's a fine prospect, not a great one, but the Titans have to figure out soon what they're doing with Ryan Tannehill, who's in his mid-30s, and they're not winning in the playoffs. They might not move on from him right now, but planning for the future so they don't get left behind might be a prudent move in Nashville.
With the 27th overall pick in our 2022 NFL Mock Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select
Andrew Booth Jr., cornerback, Clemson. There's a lot to like about Andrew Booth as a prospect who's got college pedigree coming from a consistently great Clemson defense. He's got the very vaunted sticky traits as an outside cornerback, not giving his receivers any room to breathe. There's a lot to like about him as a prospect and a lot to like about the fit with Tampa Bay as well. The Buccaneers did just re-up with Carlton Davis on a deal in free agency this year, but Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting are both going into the final years of their contracts, so they need a future starting cornerback. Enter Andrew Booth.
With the 28th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Green Bay Packers select
Travis Jones, interior defensive lineman, UConn. Now, this is a Green Bay Packers kind of pick, taking a freak athlete from a less heralded program who could become a very productive player within the next couple of years. Travis Jones doesn't look like the best athlete, but he certainly is one and tested phenomenally, a relative athletic score of 9.4, and an elite broad jump number, which is something the Packers covet, and a hat tip to Jake Morley for that tip. The Packers, in the worst way, need to find some athletic help on the defensive line next to Kenny Clark.
With the 29th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Kansas City Chiefs select
Daxton Hill, safety, Michigan. While I don't trust that the Chiefs would want to go with a cornerback with this pick to fix their defensive secondary because they have proven monetarily and in the draft they don't value using a lot of capital on that spot, I do think they would be interested in Daxton Hill as a replacement for Tyrann Mathieu, a safety who can play center field, who can play in the box, and who has strong coverage skills. The safety room for the Chiefs for now does look solid with Juan Thornhill coming back and Justin Reed now signed, but Hill could be a long-term starter for this defense.
With the 30th overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Kansas City Chiefs, again, select
Arnold Ebiketie, edge rusher, Penn State. The Kansas City Chiefs desperately need help rushing the passer off the edge, which was abundantly clear all of last year, especially once we got to the playoffs. So enter Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State, who needs some seasoning at the next level, but is a speed rusher extraordinaire, and even as a rotational player right off the rip, should be able to contribute and at least generate some pressure off the edge. He might not usurp Frank Clark in the starting lineup right away, but he is the future of this pass rush and should factor into the mix in his first season.
With the 31st overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Cincinnati Bengals select
Kenyon Green, interior offensive lineman, Texas A&M. Given the way the board has fallen in this mock draft, this ends up being one of the most no-duh, no-brainer picks of the entire first round. The Cincinnati Bengals still desperately need more help on their offensive line to protect the often-sacked Joe Burrow. They've done some this offseason, which is good, but they need more. So bring in Kenyon Green, who made 35 starts through his junior season at Texas A&M, who can play guard or tackle. He likely projects to play inside, but in a pinch, he could be moved outside to help as well.
With the 32nd overall pick in our 2022 NFL mock draft, the Detroit Lions select
Nakobe Dean, inside linebacker, Georgia. I know there are injury concerns with Nakobe Dean, but that should be the only reason, other than just a general lack of value the NFL places on linebackers, why he should drop all the way to the end of the first round. I watched more linebacker tape this year than any other position, and he was clearly the best player in this year's class of linebackers. He's good against the pass, he's aggressive, he's as smart as anyone, he's fluid, he's not especially big, but all the intangibles and actual skills are there for a long-term NFL starter.
The first round of our mock draft is in the books. Pretty light on quarterbacks, heavier on the edge rushers and some wide receivers as well. Things might change, though, as we now transition into round number 2. And to start things off, here are picks 33 through 37.
We've got a run now on inside linebackers after Nakobe Dean went with the final pick of the first round in this mock draft. Devin Lloyd from Utah and Christian Harris from Alabama are both going in the first 4 picks of the second round. Detroit also adds Desmond Ridder, the quarterback from Cincinnati, as a prospect to sit behind Jared Goff this season. Meanwhile, the first running back of the draft is off the board, with Houston taking Breece Hall from Iowa State.
Our first running back now off the board. Let's get into our next group of picks 38 through 43, which includes 2 teams making their first selection of the year.
We've got two teams making their first picks of the draft here in this next group of 6 picks, including the Chicago Bears and Indianapolis Colts at 39 and 42, each taking offensive tackles. The Bears go with Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, while Indianapolis will look to Tyler Smith from Tulsa to try to keep Matt Ryan upright. The Seattle Seahawks have 2 picks back-to-back at 40 and 41, and they'll take the best remaining edge rusher, Drake Jackson from USC, plus Dylan Parham from Memphis to try to shore up their interior offensive line. Plus, we see Jahan Dotson go off the board, the Penn State wide receiver. He heads to Atlanta, even though recently he's gotten some first-round buzz.
There are still 2 teams that haven't made a pick in this year's draft. Let's get to one of them leading off this next group, numbers 44 through 48, coming from the AFC North.
It's finally Cleveland's turn to make a pick, and with the Browns' first selection of the 2022 mock draft, they go with the tweener pass rusher from Houston, Logan Hall, and right after him, one of their division rivals get a pass rusher as well, with the Ravens taking Nick Bonito out of Oklahoma. Also, Washington tries in this next segment of picks to keep improving its defense, taking type 1 diabetic linebacker Chad Muma from Wyoming. Plus, the Chicago Bears get some help for Justin Fields as they take the polarizing 6'4 wide receiver from North Dakota State, Christian Watson.
It's certainly been a down year for quarterback prospects, but as we get into our next group of 5 picks in the second round of our 2022 NFL mock draft, we've got 2 quarterbacks, some developmental options going here in the middle of the round.
A couple of developmental quarterbacks are coming off the draft within these next 5 picks, including North Carolina's Sam Howell going to New Orleans, the highly touted but somewhat less productive quarterback from the ACC. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh gets Matt Corral, the quarterback from Ole Miss. The Kansas City Chiefs add another weapon for Patrick Mahomes, taking Sky Moore, the wide receiver from Western Michigan, and the Green Bay Packers find a tackle for the future in the super athletic Abraham Lucas out of Washington State.
We are now into the final 11 picks of round number 2 in our 2022 NFL mock draft. Let's get to 5 more with numbers 54 through 58.
We saw Jameson Williams go early in the first round, and now his running mate from Alabama, who's also coming off a severe injury, John Mechie III, is going to get drafted mid-second round in our mock draft, heading to the New England Patriots. 1 pick later, the Arizona Cardinals add Trey McBride. Tight end is not a huge need for them, but McBride is one of the best pass catchers left on the board. For Dallas, inside linebacker is something of a sneaky need, so they take Leo Chenal from Wisconsin. And we also see Kenneth Walker from Michigan State end up with the Buffalo Bills. They're going to need a replacement within the next year or two for both Zach Moss and Devin Singletary.
And as we get into the final half dozen picks of our 2022 NFL mock draft, the theme for these final 6 players, some concerns, but massively high upside.
The Green Bay Packers open this final segment of picks in the second round, taking one of my personal favorite prospects in this draft, Troy Anderson from Montana State, who in 2018 was an all-Big Sky quarterback, then 3 years later was the FCS Defensive Player of the Year across the country. The Kansas City Chiefs take George Pickens, who has quite a slide here in our mock draft, but due to some big red flags that popped up this week in some interviews, he slides and the Kansas City Chiefs benefit with their second receiver taken in the second round. We also see David Ojabo, the edge rusher from Michigan, go to the Denver Broncos, who get a developmental piece who will likely take a quote-unquote red shirt this year after blowing out his Achilles during his pro day workout.
64 picks, 31 different teams making a selection, and we have made it through our 2022 NFL mock draft. Thank you for checking it out. Make sure you leave a comment, you send me a tweet, you send me an angry email, whatever it is, letting me know what you think about our mock draft this year. You can also, of course, go check it out online anytime at WIBWnewsnow.com. Go back, take a look at it, see my predictions alongside those of both Jake and Fulton as well. We'll see which of our 580 Sports Talk co-hosts had the best mock draft once things are all said and done on Thursday for the first round, but as we get into day 2 and day 3 of the draft as well. Don't forget to tune in to 580 Sports Talk every single weekday from 2 to 6 on 580 AM in Topeka and around the world at WIBWnewsnow.com. And of course, coming up on Friday, we will be on with you from 2 until 6, recapping all things from day 1 of the draft. And we will also be previewing day 2 and day 3, rounds 2 through 7 as well.